Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show. We're delighted to be back with you again for yet another week. We have today Michael Brant DeMaria, and we're going to have a conversation from Burnout to Contribution, the way of Twilight. I think this is going to be a really thought-provoking conversation for you, but also really deep and meaningful. Michael is a fascinating man, and we're going to share a little bit about him shortly. Before I do that, I'd like to say a big thank you to my guest last week, which was US former diplomat and an enacting peace founder, Michael Macy. I had a fantastic conversation last week. I've just been talking to someone who's been sharing it with all their friends. I just want to say, if you're listening to this show, that what we really care about is about doing good in the world, and we care about business and organizations and individuals really stepping up to the mark and contributing to something better, to helping to improve the world, not to strip it of its resources or become disconnected from nature or each other, but we care about bringing people together, and we care about shining a light on people who are doing exceptional work in the world and are really allowing their good to shine, because you can use your life to contribute rather than take away. We had an amazing Elevation Collective. I lead this community called the Elevation Collective. We had an event on Monday where some exceptional people who I'd interviewed through the show over the years joined me, and we talked about connection and why that was just so important. I think, being connected with yourself and deeply, and my guest today is deeply connected with himself. You'll get that sense as soon as you meet him, but also how to really build relationships out there such that you can make a positive contribution, such that you can build a community of people around you and who will help you with the projects and initiatives that you are endorsing. So my guest today, for over 30 years, has been doing some incredible work. Over 30 years ago, he was working as a child protection psychologist, and he witnessed thousands of severe cases of abuse and neglect. And that really took a toll on him emotionally. It took a toll on him through he developed fatigue, burnout, and even suicidal thoughts. And for someone so devoted to helping others, it became a really defining question for him. How do you stay open-hearted and purposeful and resilient in the face of profound human suffering? He went on a life-changing quest in the wilderness. He was guided by a native teacher, and alone and without food or water, he entered what he now calls the way of Twilight, the space between breakdown and breakthrough, ego and soul, despair and renewal. And it was there that he rediscovers a meaning, creativity, and a deeper reverence for life. So we're going to explore this. We're going to explore the hidden cost of leadership, but also about burnout and failure, and how nature, creativity, and really authentic connection with others can lift you out of this despair, feeling of despair. Michael has gone on to do some incredible things. If you could see his backdrop that he has at the moment with all of his pipes behind him, he's actually a musician. He's been streamed over 250 million times. He's earned 4 Grammy nominations. Yet he's emerged, I think, very grounded and very full of wisdom. So we're going to have a conversation today, whether you're a leader, you're an entrepreneur, or you're a change maker, you want to do more good, you want to get on the front foot today. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. So I'd like to say a big welcome to Michael Brant DeMaria, and thank the wonderful Sandy Sedgbeer for our introduction.
God bless you, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and thank you for that really thoughtful, kind introduction. And just really want to honor you and the work you're doing in the world and the connections you're making. Just the few conversations we've had, I'm really moved by your huge heart and your desire to do good too in the world, which is so important today.
Thank you so much. So tell us a little bit about life for you. Where did it start, and what was your childhood like? Where did this concern with kind of suffering and also the meaning of life, and where did that all come from?
Yeah, well, It's interesting. My parents kind of said I came into the world a kind of a different kid to begin with. And they used to make, I didn't talk till I was almost 3, and they used to make a joke that I used to sit and watch the grass grow, that there was kind of this meditative focus I had, and that I go to the piano and hit one note at a time and listen to it. And I probably was on the what today is called the spectrum, the autism spectrum, but I was a deeply empathic, deeply highly sensitive kid for sure, middle of 3 boys. But I also think that I did have a number of surgeries, but the backdrop to that too, I grew up in New England in Connecticut, and in a beautiful place where I was surrounded by hundreds of acres of woods. And at the same time, my father was an Italian immigrant. He came here when he was 20 with nothing, selling rags on the streets of Brooklyn. And my mom grew up in foster homes from 11 on. And so they came from they had so much trauma in their lives, but also never got to work or deal with it. For them, it was, let's make the American dream, and we're going to and my dad, became a PhD chemical engineer, and they provided a beautiful home for us in a beautiful area, but there was this backdrop of heaviness too. And then I had these surgeries, including a near-death experience at 7, really made me keenly aware of what I like to call the fragility of this world. That I always felt from that point on, at the age of 7, that I could just disappear off the face of the earth in a moment, and that reality felt very groundless to me in that way. It's still, to some degree, I call it the groundless ground or the sourceless source. So that was kind of the backdrop of my childhood, and part of, I think, one of the reasons I decided to pursue psychology, and then also work with children who are traumatized. I was actually trained as a child adolescent psychologist, doing expressive arts therapy, play therapy, music therapy, movement therapy. But also that led into, because I was really focusing on trauma, and I would help kids prepare for surgeries that never I received. Like back when I was a kid, the theory was that, don't tell the kids they're having a surgery till the day up. So 2 years in a row, my mom would pick me up from school, first grade and second grade, and with a suitcase, and, oh, we're going to the hospital, you have to have another surgery. And I'm like, what? So we know now how traumatic that was. And I had a lot of night terrors, those things. So I would do that, but the majority, there was a position open for a tri-county child psychologist, which was frontline training, 2 days a week for 10 years. I was seeing frontline abuse, either kids at risk or had just come in because they had been abused, and question of whether or not taken away from their families, etc. So, and I loved the work initially, but over time it took its toll.
Yeah, because were you kind of attracted into that area of trauma because you had experienced trauma yourself?
Yeah, for sure. We kind of, it was, and I think there was 2 sides of it. It was, I went to a very unique graduate school where we were told we needed to be in therapy to do therapy, which I'm very grateful for, individual group therapy. And I was always really compassionate. My mom would tell the story that she said, "Oh, you were meant to be a psychologist." I would sit on the phone, even at first, second, third, fourth grade, and I would have the phone by my head, and she said, "Michael, is there anybody on the other line?" And I'd shush her. I'd say, "Shh, I'm listening." And so I was a listener. I loved listening to people. I felt, this huge compassion. My professor said I had the patience of Job, and sometimes you're saying, that you're a saint. I don't know how but I was like, for me, I'm drawn to when somebody's suffering, how can I alleviate that? It's just in my DNA.
Yeah. And you mentioned there about you watching the grass grow
Let grass
almost, and
grow.
and
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and
listening
the
to the
key on the
grass.
piano and listening to
Yes.
the
Yes.
resonance of it. So there's something, deep
Yeah.
inside you, wasn't there?
Yeah, I even say it today, deep listening. In fact, for me, music for me is so similar to having been, so many years doing therapy and counseling, and because they're both about listening, really listening. Because the great musician, if you listen, this was one of my teachers would always say, any recording I encourage the audience, ask yourself, is the person playing the music listening to what they're playing? And especially when there's improvisation going on, but even the ultimate classical, the reason we love amazing musicians and are moved, because they're in the moment, in the music, and they're listening like mad, and they are as entranced with each note as if it's coming out of for the very first time. And that only happens when you're truly present and in the music and listening. So much music doesn't touch us because they've rehearsed it so much. They're thinking about what they're going to do when they get back from the concert.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting, I call it deep listening. And I think that is when I know your work is so much about relationship and connection. And that to me is listening from the heart, imagining your heart is like an ear, speaking from the heart, allowing the words to come through your heart before they come out of your mouth, and going to the heart of a topic or situation. And those were three of the teachings that I received on my quest.
Wow. And when did you first get very actively involved in music? Then was that a young age too? You mentioned that you had the piano, you
Yeah,
pressed the key.
yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, it's a funny story because I, hear my parents, and actually I really began doing that in a big way after my surgery, because I felt betrayed by my parents, by the doctors. I had 200 stitches inside and outside of my abdomen, and I just was in such pain, 7 years old, and I had what we call in psychology depersonalization, derealization. I didn't feel like my life was quite real. I felt like it was a movie. It was like a dream. And I would go to the piano, I'd close my eyes and hit one note at a time and just listen to that note just slowly dissolve into silence. And that reminded me of the experience I had on my near death experience, where I literally felt on the other side of things, which was full of color and light and amazing, like angelic, like music, And yet when I came back to my body, it felt like the hand grenade had gone off in my abdomen, and I was in a child's ward with kids without arms and legs, screaming, and I felt like I was in hell. And so when I go to the piano, I felt that was like helping me take me to that world. But I realized I was sound healing, way before that I knew what that was. The funny side of the story, though, is my mom said, "Oh, you want to play the piano?" And they took me to all of these like really accomplished classical musicians to try to teach me, who were like, hitting my, wrapping my ankle, my knuckles with a ruler, just like the nuns at Catholic school. And I was a terrible piano student because I would come and say, I've been practicing my own music and listen to what I created. And they would say, you cannot play any music or create music until you have become, sight reader, blah, blah, blah. And that's the left brain, where I've always been so right brain dominant. And then at 9, I got hooked on percussion and drumming, and I really found some great teachers. So I really worked with music from middle school, no, actually elementary school, probably third, fourth grade till high school. I played in a jazz band, and I'm actually probably most classically trained with drumming and percussion. But I got into synthesizers in college. But it was at the age of 31 on my this native quest in the wilderness without food or water that I first heard the sound of the native flute. And I was going through a lot of this compassion fatigue. There were 2 young girls I was working with who were raped and murdered. And I just was completely devastated. I was completely lost. And I couldn't understand. And I felt somehow, because there was a question about this person, I was not able to prove that this person was doing it. He was on to what was happening. And then this happened. And my Christian upbringing didn't help me. My psychology PhD didn't help me. And I really struggled with suicidal feelings at the time. And through a much too long story to get into, I found myself through a series of synchronicities. Fortunately, I had studied Jung, so I knew to follow synchronicities like breadcrumbs through a dark forest, and found myself on this native reservation without food or water, and heard the native flute, and it broke my heart open. And one of the traditional words for the vision quest actually was a term British anthropologists came up to describe what they saw Native people in the Americas doing. But their word, one of them, there are many words, Hamblechape, means the lament in the wild, or the lamentation, that you go out in the wilderness and you cry to Creator for a vision for your life. And I cried like buckets for days. And that broke my heart open. And that's where the real radical shift and change happened. And I said, when I get back, I have to learn to play this instrument. And my teacher said, I said, how do I play this thing? He said, play it only at night, outside, by yourself for a year. And it will teach you, and you'll find your soul song, which will tell you where you come from, who you are, and what you're here to do.
Wow. And what did your year teach you then?
It taught me that there is a river, a deep inmost center of the human heart, actually a spring. It is a spring that lies the edge of life and death, night and day, joy and sorrow, male and female, life and death. And it is a spring of the great loving. And the great loving is here to help heal the deepest wound and calm the greatest fear. And it is my soul work to tend that spring in myself and all those I come across.
Beautiful. I've got goosebumps.
I still do.
Yeah. So you kind of you describe it as a bridge of despair that you'd hit. Compassion fatigue is another word that
yes.
you use. But it was going on that quest enabled you to do the inner work.
Yes. And one of them, I like to say, it was such a dark time, but something broke open to where all of a sudden it was as if I moved from my grief to the grief. It was like the whole world. I was immersed in the natural world in a deep way, and there were, deer and bear and the river that I was fasting by, and the sky and night sky. It was in Canada, and where there was no light pollution, and the stars, and there were meteors, and the sense in which I was part and parcel of the natural world, that it wasn't an idea, it wasn't a concept, that it was a felt experience about being connected and in relationship to everything. That I could begin to listen to the wisdom of the tree and the river and the grass. And I felt it connected me to that whole history of, throughout history, even our monotheistic religions, Jesus in the desert and Buddha under the Bodhi tree. And for me, it was, they didn't do that, so we don't have to. They showed us the way that we have to, as you find, that sense of a depth of knowing of who you are. Not the ego. The ego is our social self. The social self's not a bad guy. The ego's not a bad guy, but it's a social self. It's not our core. It's not our essence. And we didn't come into the world with an ego, but we came in with a soul. When I say soul, I'm not using any religious context. I'm using it in the original meaning of our inward, deepest essence, and the sense of knowing what you're willing to die for. that this is me. When the sky falls, when the rug is pulled out from under me, this is what I stand for. This is who I am. And we live in such a superficial time, in such a superficial culture. As some would say, Robert Blythe, the poet said, we live in a sibling society. We're all children, most people. Their native culture teaches there's something beyond adulthood. We just have childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and then, elderhood maybe. But for them, there's a place called soulhood. I'm using that term, my own term, but soulhood is when we've had a soul initiation, when the ego's moved out of the controlling center of gravity of the self, and the soul takes that place. And that's a Jungian concept, where he said that, when somebody would come to him and say, I'm at the end of my rope, I've lost my job, I'm getting divorced, I've lost all my money. And he'd say, ja, gut, now something will happen. And, for him, it was when we are at the end of our, that is when the ego can begin to give way to the soul. Because the ego is so intent on, what we call narcissistic defense and hubris, and, which we see throughout the world and culture today. And if you don't know who you are going to vote for people who don't know who they are. And I'll leave it at that.
I've got so many questions flowing through me at the moment. I can liken in a little bit your experience to mine with my family. And my family were, father was a steel worker, grandfather was a steel worker, didn't have the opportunity or the feel that there was the scope in their system to do the inner work.
Yes,
the
material,
opportunity, the content,
yes.
the opportunity, and my family had kind of a clear view as probably where I was going to go in my career, and I know with yours, your father had strong expectations about
Yes.
your career, and I
Yes.
kind of wonder how you dealt with that, because you must now be a very different character to the one your parents envisaged you
Yeah.
becoming.
Yeah, well, yes and no. It's interesting and such a good point. And I do realize, and I do think that's why both of us feel a responsibility to do something with our lives, because it's true. I mean, particularly since the Industrial Revolution, the entire educational system of the Western culture, outside of a few notable examples, if you're really wealthy, is creating cogs in an industrial wheel. We're not looking at truly liberating the human soul and the mind and the heart. But my father, coming here as an immigrant, he wanted nothing more than to be a medical doctor. And his great ambition in life he wanted to cure cancer. He had a huge heart, and both my parents were dreamers in their own way. And at 18, Chris, I told him, I said, I want to go to LA and study music and film. And he literally laughed in my face and then said, like hell, you're the son of an immigrant, your mother grew up in foster homes, you are going to be a doctor. Your brothers don't have the ability. You are a gifted student. You know math and science backwards and forwards. And I was this dutiful altar boy. The downside of this big, huge heart of compassion was I am also in recovery from codependency. My sense of my addiction has never been, substances. It's been the need to be needed. That's been my addiction, which to me, I laugh, but it's as lethal. I was on the edge of despair and suicide because I felt if I couldn't fix people and help everybody, there was something wrong with me. This kind of, sometimes we call the white knight complex or the Jesus complex. I suffered from that, hey, I'm human, and that's okay. But it took me so long to get there. So what's interesting, I didn't totally buck my dad, because I was like, well, what kind of doctor can I be and explore creativity and music and poetry and art? And because if I couldn't buck my dad at 18, Chris, going to LA, it would have eaten me alive. And I had no sense of
Yeah.
self. I didn't
Yeah.
know who I was. And I probably would have just been a panderer to the passing trends and lost myself as most, even if I was successful, that's almost that's terrible, so
Mm.
because you get so fed that ego, you don't know who you are outside of that. So I was like, okay, I found out about music therapy, art therapy, drama therapy, poetry therapy. So how about if I become a psychologist? I started to read Carl Jung and get my, and he said, well, if you get your PhD, but it's still not a real doctor. So he was very disappointed. Even he lived to 92, passed away a few years ago, and I would do meditations and some concert at his assisted living home, and I go out there and everybody, say, "Oh, you're the Grammy nominated, musician," and he go, "Ah, he's really a doctor." but but it's actually a really good example of the way of Twilight, because my father did know something, and I didn't. It was not. I could not have really created music and film from the heart at that age, and plying my trade in human suffering for 20, 30 years. And although I am an artist deep in my heart, even deeper is my desire to help.
Mm.
And there's something called the Enneagram, and I used to think there's the four is the artist, and I always thought I self-diagnosed as an artist, but when I did the long form test, I'm what's called a helper. But the helper integrates and is healthier by expressing their creativity. So I actually believe in a new archetype on the planet that I think is almost like a modern version of the shamanic tradition, and that is being an artist hyphen healer. And for those listeners out there, particularly in the business world, other world, one way I've seen this is thinking of it as kind of like crop rotation or infinity sign, that to the degree helping others is great, but it depletes us.
Mm.
And creativity begins to put fuel back in our tank. Because for years, I was doing like 3 days of therapy and 4 days of creativity. And I loved sitting there and being there for someone else. But by the third day, I was exhausted and I wanted to dive into my creativity. And after 4 days of creating, it's very self-absorbed, and I'd go into the self and the soul, and that was great. But after 4 days, I was sick of myself and I wanted to sit there and be with somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think particularly those in the business world, and I work with, I still do, not a lot of it, but I do what I call soul sessions, which is, helping very, highly uh, accomplished people who though have run out of juice for their own soul, because if we get too other directed, we deplete the soul. If we get too self-directed, we get too self-absorbed, that is as much of a danger. So the way of Twilight is balancing these poles of self and other. I have this little practice I do, which is my heart, your heart, my heart, your heart. Before my quest, I was your heart, your heart, your heart, your heart. And there was no my heart, my heart, my heart. So authentic relationship begins with an authentic relationship with ourselves. And this is another native mantra, and that I encourage everyone to ask. Do you love yourself enough? Do you love yourself enough to listen with the ears of your heart to all the other voices of yourself speaking? And I had stopped listening to the voice of my childhood voice, my teenager voice, my artist voice, because at the time I went on that quest, I wasn't doing my music at all. I had left that. I was helping other people do their music, but in music therapy, but that part of me had gotten lost in my codependent, compulsive caretaking of others. And there's a really wonderful difference between taking care versus caretaking, right? You can just feel the difference. And for those of us who have big hearts and are empathic and highly sensitive, it's a difference that really makes a difference.
It's beautiful, and I'm just finding with myself really resonating what you're saying. I think the more I feel of late, I've been a lot of giving,
Yes.
and actually what's happening at the moment is I've become the last probably 6 months more and more drawn to my music to
Beautiful.
to
Beautiful.
and I think it's
Balance.
compensation.
Yeah.
I'm spending more and more time with my music.
Yes. Yeah. And no, it's such a, I mean, I do a lot of mindfulness training. I've taught yoga, all of this, but to me, music, all creativity is one of the most powerful responses to suffering. And I feel it kind of keeps that spring we're talking about at the inmost center of the heart, it keeps it clear. It keeps that, because when we're focusing too much on everyone else, we can't be in touch with an inward heart center that is nourishing to us. And there's something about music to me too that helps us find that flow state. And to me, most indigenous cultures don't even have a word for musician. They 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 see it more as like a channel, and they actually say everybody has that music capacity, and that the music is all around us, but we have to stop and listen and let it flow through us.
Yeah.
And it also gets us out of this left brain consciousness, which is turning everything into duality, black and white, self and other. Yeah. So I'm thrilled you have that outlet, and you're doing more of that, Chris. That's wonderful.
So it's been a beautiful first half to this interview. A lot of things for people to go away, I think, and reflect upon. I often say to people, if you're listening to this and you're in a place where you can write something down, what's been the one or maybe two takeouts that you've got, little gold nuggets that you can take away and do something with. After the break, we'll find out a little bit more about the incredible work, music that Michael has done. Also, a little about his film Twilight Cafe. But then we'll really start to think about what happens when you are at that point of overwhelm, or burnout, which many of us have get to in this world today. I've been there myself. And what are the practical steps that we can take really to enable us to move into a different, more productive, more creative space with our lives, and I also recognizing not everybody with their family situations have the opportunity to go off on retreats and things like that. So we'll do that after the break. Do join us in just a couple of minutes. Hi, this is Chris Cooper. I'm with Michael Brant DeMaria, and we've been talking about burnout through to and Michael's experience really of his journey, which involved a lot of trauma, and then taking the opportunity to move to listen very deeply and spend a lot of time with his music, but out in the wilderness as well, for really discovering himself, his true inner self, and calling. And I just wonder if we talked about music, but I'm just trying to just help us understand how the music that you create that has reached 250 million listeners and resulted in 4 Grammy Award nominations. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, the last thing, I mean, music was my first love. No two ways about it. And at 7, I wanted to be a musician, and then I shared already a little bit about this interesting journey. And, there was the piano, and there was drums and percussion, and there were synthesizers, and then though something shifted on that quest. And after that year of playing the flute by myself outside at night, music, I started to understand something that ethnomusicologists, and I'm an amateur ethnomusicologist, which is somebody who studies the origins of music and both the ethnic and indigenous origins of all music. And I began to understand the thing that was getting in the way of my music was that our culture is very strange. In lots of ways, our culture is strange. But one of the big ways it's very strange is that we're probably one of the first cultures on the planet who sees music as primarily entertainment and showing off. And, and there's somebody on stage making music, because that's not how it happened. That's when we're talking tens of thousands of years. We know probably, even Homo sapiens, but the other hominids, we're going back 150, 200,000 years. And we show bone flutes going, evidence 60,000 years in these caves throughout Europe and elsewhere. Drums going back probably longer. In indigenous Africa, didgeridoos going back equally as long. Music was a form of community building, ceremony, connecting to a larger presence, and in particular, usually in a circle together, making music to connect with the natural world. Many early musical instruments were designed to mimic, connect to, sometimes prey. You were hunting, but not necessarily, other kinds of animals. One of the most popular examples, of course, is the flute with birds. And I literally have some of my flutes that I have this owl out here, and it sounds just like her mate. Yeah. And we have like these little duets. This higher flutes, I can play with the other bird. I always say the birds give me some of my best stuff. And I think what began to happen is I was playing music after that year of apprenticeship to my own heart, my own soul, and the natural world. I was in the music, and the music became a prayer, a meditation. It became inside out. As one of my dear friends and teachers would say, don't show off and don't hide when you play. Play slowly, play simply, and let it flow through your heart before it comes out. And to this day, no matter what happens in my day, I always have flute with me in my car, and if I travel, and no matter how the day has been, Chris, I pick up one of my flutes, and that first note, I'm on the other side of things, which is the title of my podcast. And so I think we're all so hungry for that. We're so hungry for something authentic. We're so hungry. And I hear I don't know how it works. I don't know how it happens. It's all really mysterious to me. And in some ways, it's the most simple thing in the world, because I feel very much like I did at that piano. And I'll hear people say, I was on an Alaska cruise and I heard this music. It's like, that's got to be Michael. And they find out that it was me, or that they're, hearing, and they're coming down the stairs and they're listening to Spa Radio, XM Sirius, or Pandora, or Spotify. And it's like, that's got to be Michael. And they check in, it's me. And it's like, and the funny thing is, Chris, I feel like what I do is so simple, just so simple. And I think what most people make music much more complicated than it is. And I really feel like when it comes right down to it, it's love. It's just about love, and expressing. It's, to me, probably one of our there's a lot of people in ethnomusicology and anthropology who truly believe, and I'm one of them, that language emerged out of music making. Music was our first form of languaging,
Yeah.
and there's some real interesting evidence for that, and I think why it also moves us so deeply. So when I think of my music, it's like it's great when it might find an audience, but I'll tell you this. I don't know. Tell me if you do this. So currently, I'm living in this condominium, and there's 16 floors, and I love stairways, and I love to go into stairways and play. But now I'm like, it's a great workout as to walking the stairs. But like my cutting edge right now is my voice, and I do this kind of Gregorian chant like. And for me, it's like it's a meditative practice. Music making is part of meditation, and I feel like the most important music I make is for creator, is for the great mystery, is for the natural world, is for the universe, the cosmos, that I don't record everything I play. I don't want to be, the Midas touch, when some people become so addicted to producing everything they create. And to me, it's so not the indigenous way, which means like if we take some water, we give some water back. So I think it's a lot of reviewers, I think just that it's sincere and authentic, and it gets past so much of the critical mind, because I am playing from the heart for the heart.
And if people are now listening to this and intrigued, as I am, what would you recommend people listen to get a sense of your
Yeah.
music? Is there a particular recording?
Sure. It's so interesting. My firstborn, because I do feel like they're like children.
Yeah.
My firstborn, so many people come back to it, and I was so innocent because I had no idea what I was doing. I've been playing music for a long time, but from that 1993 was the quest, and I didn't come out with an album for 10 years till 2003, and that album is called The River.
Yeah.
And I have people around the world who say, they go to bed every night by the river. And the river is it takes you on a journey, and there's a lot of layers and levels to it. But a lot of people to this day say it's their favorite, and it's like your firstborn, it's a really, really near and dear to my heart. And followed closely by Ocean, which is by far my most popular album, the album that's been out there. What's interesting is The River, I didn't know how to release an album. There's no awards. It doesn't have any awards, but it's a personal favorite for so many people. And I think it's a great, people play it for their, get their babies to be quiet, or play it for their horses, or their animals tend to be quiet. And then Ocean, which is the follow-up, the river flowing into the ocean. And there's all kind of layers and levels of philosophy behind both of them, philosophically and spiritually. But those two by far are probably, personal favorites and many people's favorites.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to my bedtime listening tonight.
Awesome. Well, those pictures in the back, the ocean has that kind of cover look
Yeah.
and feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Fantastic. So tell us about Twilight Cafe and your
Yeah.
film.
Yeah, so this is a short film based upon a full-length play that I wrote back in 2007, and performed here, won Best Play of the Year in this regional area, and it was the first full-length play I wrote and was produced. I've written two others that have been produced. But I still, at 7, I wanted to be a musician. At 9, I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I actually based upon an English film that I watched as a kid when I was by myself at home. And England, I think, was called Sammy Goes South. But in this country, it was released as A Boy 10 Feet Tall, about a 9-year-old boy like myself going from Algiers all the way down to South Africa and Durban. But anyway, film to me is the most powerful art on the planet. Its ability to touch people, to move people. When I talked about what the Vision Quest taught me, about the inmost center of the human heart and lying at the edge of life and death, night and day, joy and sorrow, all these opposing dualities, that there's the spring of the great loving. That's what I see as my soul work. My music, my writing, my poetry, and film are what I call delivery systems for my soul work. And I would ask anybody out there, whatever your career is wonderful, but when we talk about connecting with your soul, and your soul work is, because there's our survival work, but also then there's our soul work, which brings us most alive, which we do when we're not doing anything else, which is what feels most natural, effortless, and instinctual. And I believe one of the greatest joys on the planet is when your soul work and survival work are like two strands of DNA that you weave them together and they start to merge, which I feel so grateful that's happened in my life. So at the grand old age of 56, I lived my childhood dream, partly supplemented by the success of my music, and went to LA. And instead of going at 18, I went at 56 and went to a really intensive 3-month filmmaking school. And it was great for anybody who wants to live some of their childhood dreams. Every day I just jumped out of bed and it was like, I'm at film school. And it was right between Warner Brothers and Universal Studios. And we were filming in the Universal Studios backlot from day one. And it's such a wonderful time. And I did 2 films while I was out there, and I've done 2 or 3 short films since. And the premiere version of that is, I took that play I did in 2007 and I turned it into full-length screenplay, and then pared it down to a short film as a proof of concept. And it was released last year, or last year and a half. It's premiered in 27 different film festivals in 4 different countries. It's won a whole host of awards. We actually made it to the Oscar entry list. We did not make the short list, but we qualified. We qualified
Wow.
for admission to the Oscars, and tremendous response. So many awards for best film, best drama film, different acting awards, and cinematography, directing. And it's all about this young man who finds himself on a bridge, literal bridge, about to jump and commit suicide. And I actually had an experience like that before the 30-year-old experience. It kind of draws from an experience I had in college, from heartbreak and betrayal and contemplating suicide. And the message of the film is, we all end up on that bridge of despair, and what keeps us off is each other.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So if anybody's listening to this right now who's maybe feeling on that bridge of despair, they're feeling overwhelmed, or they're feeling close to burnout or at burnout, what are 2 or 3 maybe practical steps that they could take to help them on this journey to being much more fulfilled and happy and on the front foot of life, really?
Yeah. So important. And it's epidemic in our world today. Close to 1 million people a year commit suicide in the world today.
Yeah.
And it's only getting worse, particularly with young children. And I think it is such a symptom of that we live in a very disconnected, heartless, soulless culture for the most part. And again, part of what you're doing is being part of the solution and connecting people. And it is about connection. I think the first and foremost is talk to somebody. But I also want to say, and this is really, really important, and you get pushback a lot from people on this, but it's so essential. It makes such a difference. And I'll share, it comes from my first existentialism class. I was a philosophy psych major as an undergraduate, and my existential philosophy professor, who was from Belgium, went through the war, deep into Sartre and Camus. First day of class, first thing he asks, who here has thought about suicide? And nobody's putting up their hand. And when the girl in front of me, she was in this tie-dyed summer dress, and she puts up her hand. She had these tattoos. And I was like, I've thought about it, but I'm a psych major. I'm supposed to have it together, whatever that is. But for some reason, my hand went up. And it was just she and I, And she's looking around the room. And he was kind of like Sartre in person. I mean, he was just kind of surly, and he glared at everyone in the room and us. And then all of a sudden he said, at least we have two honest people in this room. And then he followed with, Camus said, the only true philosophical question is whether or not to kill ourselves. Because if we didn't realize it's human nature to reflect on and realize I could end my life. And that becomes, well, if I'm going to live an automatic, habitual, follow the herd, I'll never ask that question. But as soon as I ask that, it's like, okay, what is giving my life meaning? Why am I here? And that was when I was 18 and on that bridge, because I was on that bridge, and I put the word out to God, if you want me to stay around, you need to give me an answer. And I got an answer. The normalizing of it and not pathologizing of it. We are over-medicating the human condition. It's not about pathology. It's about the human condition. And when you first, Carl Jung was famous for saying, if you can kill yourself without causing any bodily harm, please do so. Because the idea was you needed more of an egocide than a suicide. And I would say, write down what in your life you want to die. In fact, before the vision quest, you do two. In fact, the vision quest is often called the little death. And one of the preparations, and I guided vision quests after that for 10 years. I trained to be a guide. What in my life is dying and needs to die? Followed by what in my life is trying to be born and needs to be born? Yeah. And then all of a sudden you realize it's a predictable, in our culture, that is the move from adulthood to soulhood, is asking that question.
Yeah.
Which means that because there's no authenticity until we ask that question. The other thing I would say is try to take as much time for yourself. You don't have to go out on a huge vision. You don't have to find a native elder and go starve without food or water. The going without food can be helpful, but solitude, time in nature, contemplation, journaling, and those two big questions: what in my life is dying and needs to die? What in my life is trying to be born? Because what it is, it's exactly, like I even like to say, depression is actually a mutiny of the soul.
Yeah.
And the other way I like to say burnout, I'm glad came back around to this. So when you think about burnout, burn, hot, heat. When we're, all work and no play makes Michael a depressed boy, a suicidal boy, right? So you have too much fire in your life. And our entire Western culture is built, it's so fast-paced, especially now. And that is, in native terms, we say your medicine wheel, we want to balance you have air, fire, water, and earth in your medicine wheel. And in our culture is all in what we call the south of the medicine wheel. It's all about fire and passion and desire and fast pace. And you need some water. So you can also say, what is my soul thirsty for? What is my heart thirsty for? And finding a non-judgmental, compassionate person to listen to you. Yeah. I truly say my best friend loved me through that first bridge of despair. Yeah. He was still my best friend today. I saw him this week. He was in town, and we have this bond. And it only takes one. More is better, but find someone who can just listen. And I am, unfortunately, a lot of you Google something about suicide. Next thing you know, they want to put you on medication, which actually stunts and stops the initiatory process of the soul.
Yeah. Michael, I'm going to have to leave it there.
Yeah, no worries. I heard the beep.
An incredible conversation.
Bless your heart.
And so much there to think about, what is dying and needs to die, and what is trying to be born and needs to be born, I think are incredible. questions, and finding that person who can really truly listen, and solitude, and time in nature. It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you, Michael. What a gift. And if you do check out Michael's website, michaeldemaria.com. That's michaeldemaria.com. I'd also recommend checking out the river and the ocean. I shall certainly be listening to those today, and also Twilight Cafe. But Michael, what an absolute privilege. On next week's show, we have Daniel Wood. Daniel founded the Swedish Wealth Institute. He puts on incredibly huge online events with many well-known leaders in the self-development world. I think his last one had about 18,500 people signed up to it as a company. And we're going to talk a little bit about Daniel's journey next week. He's part of my Elevation Collective community as well. He's really out there doing good and looking to contribute even more to the world, reach a lot of people. So we're going to talk a little bit about that journey, and how his lessons and learnings from that about business and from life next week. So do join us next week. Once again, a huge thank you to Michael Brant DeMaria. Do check him out. An incredible body of work. And any questions or comments, love to hear from you. chris@chriscooper.co.uk. You can always get in touch with me, and wishing you well. Take care. Go away and have a think about what you've learned today, and one or two points that maybe you can implement into your life that will make a real difference and put you on that trajectory to doing lots of good in the world, and connecting with lots of great people.